Welcome to a Sunday Musicale at Community United Methodist Church. I'm Chris Garofalo, the music director. We're very happy to have Megan Wells return. She's been a frequent guest here over the past 9 years. Her biography is in our program over here. In addition, what's missing, and she's really an award-winning storyteller. She's won the Joseph Jefferson Award as well as the Circle of Excellence Award and a number of others. She's told stories with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra and other venues around the city, actually around the nation. And if you are interested in some of our previous musicales, all of the videos are available on our website, onecumc.net/musicale. There's a reception following the program, which you are welcome to attend. There's a basket in the back if you'd like to make a donation to the church, which supports this and other programs by the Senior Outreach Program. And Megan's offered a very special treat for all of us today, which is that after the program, she will be up here to chat with all of you. If you have questions about Mary Shelley or the music or the process of how we put this all together, you're welcome to come up and talk to both of us then. So let's welcome Megan Shelley as, I'm mixing our names up, Megan Wells as Mary Shelley.
Quite all right. I get confused too. I am borrowing Megan Wells's body to bring this forth for you, and she is very insistent that I start by saying something funny. She says that I am rather a tragic pessimist, and I cannot argue with her. My life was not a happy cotton candy place, but I do know it is very important to make people laugh. It is very difficult to listen to someone going on and on and on if you don't like them. And I'm not funny, at least not on purpose. So I think the best that I will be able to do is to take you into my heart. And the best doorway into the heart is music. So we will have our maestro begin us with a Beethoven, I do believe. No? A Mendelssohn. Yeah, I am fortunate and get to just listen with you. utterly sublime. The great ache of my life, to make words do that. I would often, after being at a salon, come home and go straight to my desk and attempt to let that music pour out of my fingers into some sort of images that would make a feeling like that. I don't think I quite ever did. I did my best. Percy, though, my husband Percy was a poet. Oh, you know that. And his poetry could do that. I was 19 years old when I wrote Frankenstein. Have any of you read it? Oh, I'm so glad to hear it. From start to finish? Oh, thank you. All my life there is this question. In all my death there is the same question. How is it that a 19-year-old girl could write such a thing? And in your time, when you ask that question, how is it that Mary Shelley could have written such a thing as Frankenstein when science fiction hadn't even been invented yet? Oh, she must have self-published on the interwebs. Oh, good, I'm being funny. But in my day, you see, the question, how is it that a 19-year-old girl could write such a thing? The question was really this. You see, it's all where you put the emphasis in the sentence. How is it that a 19-year-old girl could write anything at all? You see, in my day, 19 was actually quite old, and you would have had produced a couple of children by then. Whether they lived or not was anybody's bet in my world. I was born to Mary Wollstonecraft and William Godwin. I do not see those names sparking any recognition in your eyes. But you see, they are foundations on which you stand. My father, William Godwin, wrote a book called Political Justice. Yes, I see even less recognition at that. This book, Political Justice, was written painstakingly, word for word, unending. Sometimes it would take my father a week to complete one paragraph because he was a Calvinist. Well, you know what a Calvinist is. It means you can't have any pleasure of any kind. You can't smile, you can't dance, and everything must be morally perfect. Though his moral stance was more about the power of self-will, the power of an individual to create a community that could self-govern. You see, he was reacting against a world of atrocity, kings who were devoted only to themselves and to power. It was such a rebellious notion to let people find self-governing governance among themselves. It was such a radical idea that everyone read my father's book. It traveled by ships all the way across the ocean, right over here onto this ground on which you stand. And didn't John Adams and Thomas Jefferson read it? My father's ideas, substantive to the creation of your own Constitution and Declaration of Independence from my king. You know, King George. You've all seen the musical Hamilton, haven't you? The Mad King George, they called him. That was the world into which I was born. My father's political justice going out and bringing him great fame, not fortune, just great fame. And my mother had found a fortune of her own. How? By sheer perseverance and a radical notion. My mother, if you trace it back, was the very, very, very first woman to pen out this world-changing idea that children would do better if both parents were treated equally. Virginia Woolf later said that my mother was the very first feminist, but yes, mother, I'm just getting to it. She rolls in the grave every time I say the word. My mother was not a feminist, she was an equalist. She wanted equality of treatment and rights. Why? Well, you see, my mother's story isn't even darker than my own. I don't know. I think they stand neck and neck like two good horses, carrying the future in a carriage along a very dark and stormy road. Mother was born into a world that was urging itself up from its established two classes. There were those who had everything and those who served them. And those who served them had only the fortune to be in service. Yes, and those who had everything were mostly the royals, mostly, and the knights who had served them over millennium and therefore been granted great lands which they passed down through the wives so that they might have sons. And so this great lineage of land passed down from father to son through the burdens of a woman, or many. In the case of King Henry VIII, lop off their heads and get me another one. Her father, my grandfather, was born into that world, and there were those among the serving set who really wanted to also wear white gloves and a hat and walk about in a cane. They wanted also to lord it about. Am I not a man? May I not have my rights? And so they started to do a small thing, their own businesses. And that business class began there in England, right there in my mother's childhood. Her father would come home from working in the glove factory. He wanted to wear white gloves like the lords in the manors. Yes, now glove factory, do you know you have to kill a lot of animals in order to get the animal skin, yes. And then you have to tan the hides. And do you know the main ingredient in hide tanning? You've heard the expression piss and vinegar. Very good. Very good. It was a foul and stenchous work. And all that would go right down into the River Fleet, and all those businesses, all their filth and their waste as they tried to climb up the classes, went down into the river. Then they would come home, or they would meet in the pubs, and they would drink before they went home. And as they wanted to be lords, but they weren't lords yet, they would come home to their wives, and their wives would remind them that they weren't lords yet. To which they'd get a good smack. Or two, or three, as they were, of course, the man's property. Do you know, in your world, our world, chimpanzees were granted the right to be protected even before your wife or daughter was. Oh, we had it wrong for so long. And my mother would watch her father come home drunk as he was and wonder, was he going to beat his donkey wife again? And she wanted nothing more than to get out. Do you understand now why it was that my mother wrote a pamphlet called A Vindication for the Rights of Women? She did not say, oh, here's a lovely thought about the rights of women. Something to discuss at your tea time, perhaps. A vindication. Mary Wollstonecraft. She did so without wearing pants. move around the London Society. And that pamphlet was indeed published because it was such a curiosity. And all the London set thought that this was an interesting idea to talk about at Salon. And wouldn't it be fun to have William Godwin and Mary Wollstonecraft to the same events? The Calvinist and the woman who never puts pins in her hair. My mother was beautiful and wonderful, and she would sit at one end of the table and dare to discuss her ideas. And my father, the Calvinist, would burn in his chair. But where there is a burn, there is often a spark. And those two great opposites came together, equal in the notion of independence and equality. And they railed against the institution of marriage. Absolutely a horrible, horrible, abysmal, not to be wanted state for a woman to be in, unless, of course, you have a child. Because what is worse is being illegitimate. And so my father and my mother, large with child, stood on a balcony overlooking the English heath side as a comet flew across the sky, and thought it was a good omen for their coming child, and said, "We shall only marry so that Mary will be legitimate." And so it was. And so I was born. The word that my mother was about to bring forth the auspicious child of this auspicious couple went all about London until they all came there 2 miles north from London in their carriages so they might sit downstairs and wait for the birth, this so exciting birth. And I came out. Apparently I didn't stop crying, but my mother did not stop shaking. Those down in the salon below, is it a boy, is it a boy, is it a boy? No, it's a girl, it's a girl. Oh, too bad. But they began to hear the bed rattling upstairs, and they thought, oh, she must be doing quite well. She must be up rearranging the furniture. And she wasn't. She was shaking in her bed from a fever. I do still have this now. It's called the puerperal fever, the childbirth fever. This story is before Florence Nightingale, before we learned how to wash our hands. You see, my mother gave birth, but the afterbirth would not come easily and was quite tardy within her, so that her life was at stake and her blood was draining from her, at which point you have to go and get a doctor. Well, you don't just ring up that thing that's in your pocket. No, you have to send someone, one of the servants out of the house, to go down to the street to call up a boy, one of those poor boys who lives off the kindness of strangers, and you must persuade him with a coin to go and fetch up the doctor. And if he is a bad boy, he will simply take that coin so that he might buy some food for his mother and his 3 sisters. Oh, what a bad boy. But if he was inclined to work that street regularly, he would want to earn a reputation for honesty, and he would take that coin, he'd go all the way over to the doctor's house. He would have to knock on the door. The servant, of course, would answer the door. The doctor is at his brandy. Well, tell him that there is wanting at the Wollstonecraft Godwin household. Oh, yes, I'll do. And then go into the doctor and say there is wanting at the Wollstonecraft Godwin house. And to which point the doctor said, yes, but I'm finishing my brandy. Oh, I have heard the name. It'll be interesting. I haven't been up there to the polygons to see that new suburb. And so the doctor would call for the carriage, and off he would come, and off he would take the afterbirth out of my mother's body without the help of ether. And then afterwards, look down at his hands and say, "Oh, I think my hands need a wash." You notice the order of events. After. And so she died from dirty hands. 10 days after I was born. Fortune had it that an artist had thought to paint my mother's portrait. He had painted my mother's portrait when she was quite full with me, and it was quite a large painting, and it hung over my father's desk where he would sit and perfect his words. I did not grow up with a mother. I grew up with a portrait of a mother, and I only saw her at 1 o'clock and 5 o'clock each day, because I was raised by my mother's friends there in the house with my half-sister, Fanny. And we were all tidied up, and we brought into Father straight on at 1 o'clock to wait for him to open the doors, to go out, to do his fathering. And so off we would go, out the streets of the Polygon. It was a brand new idea, the very first suburb ever, just 2 miles north of London. I thought what it'd be like to raise children in fresh air. It was shaped like a polygon. All around the most wonderful stores, a milliner, a haberdashery, a confectionery. The watchmakers, always we would stop by the watchmakers, and they were all French soldiers who had lost a limb. Of course, the French read my father's political justice and decided to have a revolution of their own, you see. And they would call out, "Bonjour, bonjour." And we would call back, Fanny and I, "Bonjour, bonjour." They fascinated us, these limbless men with their cheerful greetings in an accent we didn't recognize. But always most we waited to hear the ringing bell of the little man, we call him to the mayor of Garriout, the ringing bell of the mayor of Garriout as he would bring his little cart around that was filled with syllabub and muffins. Oh, you know the song, I know you know it. Do you know the Muffin Man? The Muffin Man, the Muffin Man. Oh, do you know the Muffin Man that lived in Drury Lane? I did know the Muffin Man there in the Polygon. And those muffins were so hot and so sweet. And we would drink it down with syllabub. Now, syllabub, you don't drink syllabub anymore. I don't think that you do. Now, if you leave the whipped cream out on the table and it melts, you think that you have failed your guests. But in my day, the whipped cream would melt down into this sweetest of creams, and it would pour out on the streets to eat with your muffins. The most exquisite memory of my life. Sublime. We were to go in afterwards, and my sister Fanny would be put to bed. And as I was my father's true lineage, not a son, but he would take me then for a walk. We would go out from the house, and we would walk 2 miles down to the church. For behind St. Paul's was the cemetery, St. Pancras Cemetery. And my mother's stone was quite large, quite tall. And right in front of it was a little bench. And my father would sit on the little bench, and he would say to me, go on, learn your letters. And I would be guided by him to take my little hand, my 3-year-old hand, and to trace my letters in my mother's gravestone. Oh, I learned my letters quick. M-A-R-Y, Mary. Mary, that's my name, Father. Yes, yes, it is. W. It's an M upside down. You're a clever girl. Wollstonecraft, stone. Mother is stone now. No, dear. The stone sits above her. Mother's in the ground. Go on, go on. God win. Godwin. Godwin, that's your last name, Father. Yes, and yours, Mary. Mary Godwin. Oh, God. Win. Some words are made of two words, Father. Yes, yes, clever girl. Does God win, Father? Does he? In the end of things? Does God win? I don't know, Mary. We'll have to think on it. Oh, shall we? We'll think on it while Maestro plays us some Beethoven. I don't know how I should have lived without music. Memories make maudlin my mood, but music makes merry more merry. The mood started very early and very young, and as I tell you the story, perhaps it becomes more clear. But then, right there, came the poets. This story of my life has 3 poets, and the first, Uncle Sam, Uncle Samuel. You might know of him, you might have heard of him, Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Yes, well, he came sweeping into our house because he had read my father's books, and he was one of my father's correspondences, and he was in trouble with his wife at home. And he was a good man. He came to our house so he might think upon it, and he might, by her letters, consider how he might improve his behavior. We loved him dearly. He looked like a cherub, only taller, without wings. He came sweeping into our house. He was not a Calvinist. Oh, no, no. He was the opposite of my father. He would come sweeping in, open up my father's office at any time, and he would say, "Oh, stop this now, open the windows, give me the children." And he would take me and my sister out, all manner of time, and our ribbons would fall and our hair would go wild. He taught us how to slide down the banisters. Yes, you know the banisters in your staircases, you still have them, don't you? Yes? And as we would slide down the banisters, he would say to us, the banister, it is not a barrister. If it were a barrister, your pockets would be empty." Yes, the banister. Yo, not the barrister. Later I learned what it meant, but it was quite funny at the time all the same. We loved him. And he said to my father, "You need a mother for the children. They've had a mother. William, get thee a wife." "No one shall ever be Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin." "No, they won't. They will be themselves. Get thee a wife." Now, fortune would have it that there was a potential wife that had just moved in next door. But I don't know whose fortune it was, because it is at this point that my story completely becomes rather like Cinderella with stepsisters and a stepmother, you see. Well, she was quite a clever, very clever woman, Mary Jane Clairmont, and she had, in those wild times, fallen in love with a French soldier who had promised to marry her when he returned from the battlefield, but he gave his blood for his country, and that was that. But she did have his child, and so she found herself another good soldier, a good soldier who said that he would come right along and take care of her children. And so they made another one before ever going to the church on time. They went to the church not on time. No, they didn't get to the church at all before he died. And there she was, with less protections than a chimpanzee. How do you live? You must be clever, and you must borrow a bit here and there. You know, you need a little bit of money to make more money. It's just how it works in every system that we've ever seen. And so she got herself into debt. Now, in those days, what happened if you had debt? Well, you couldn't go out and get a credit card now, could you? I understand we didn't get those till just recently. You went to debtor's prison. Yes, there in debtor's prison, you would learn how to be a moral person, because if you had money trouble, it meant that you were immoral. You see, that's how it follows. And so there with her 2 children from her 2 scoundrels, she had learned French from her lovers, and so she translated the Swiss Family Robinson. Now, this is a book you might know. And by that money, she got herself out and she purchased the apartments right next to my father, learned that my father lived there, went out and memorized his book. And then by watching his habits, which of course he had, yes, it was always at the same time out on the balcony every night. Yes, so she one night decided that it was time, and she put on her best dress, and she arranged her fruits. And she went out to the garden, and she called up to my father, "Oh, is it William Godwin? Is it the immortal William Godwin?" To which my father replied, "What? Oh, you great being. How I adore you. Really? Well, you know how you catch a fish, don't you? You have to have the right bait. So that was that. She got herself big with my half-brother and then went to the church, not quite on time, but to the church. And so she became my stepmother, and she was everything that you expect from a stepmother. Yes, it was quite awful. She came right in with her 2 children, and Charles was the only boy, so of course he got all the rights immediately. As for my new half-sister, Jane went marching right up the steps there, not sliding down the banister, but going up to it, right into my bedroom, found my bed, laid down upon my bed and said, "I'll take this one." And that was our struggle for the rest of our lives. Father's writing was no longer making any money, no money at all. And stepmother would just go right into his office and close the door and scream at him right in front of my watching mother. And I didn't know who to feel for, my mother, my stepmother, or my father. I knew we were running out of money. And then Uncle Samuel came back. And I was older now, living in this tension in the household. And he'd written a poem. My first poem, really, was the rhyme of the ancient mariner. Can you imagine that? Being a child, and that is your first poem. It was wonderful. I'll never forget it. I was not allowed to hear it. Stepmother made us all go to bed. I didn't stay there. I came on down. I snuck on down in the shadows. I climbed behind the sofa. I sat there behind the sofa to hear it as he would recite it. Guests would come there into the salon, and the fire would be lit right there in the fireplace. And he would recite and pace this poem. Alas, alas, for the failures sailors saw. Here, not a cross, but around my neck, the albatross. With his hands in the air like so, with the fireplace in the angle that it was, it threw upon the walls, all the way on the ceilings, a figure of shadow. From my cherub uncle, by the words of albatross, a monster of shadow made upon the wall. I dreamt it over and over and over. We couldn't survive that way, so stepmother was very clever. She got us out of the Polygon very late at night, 2 a.m., so we didn't have to do the last payment. She snuck us out, and she took us over to our next place to live on Skinner Street. There was a bookshop on the bottom floor at Skinner Street because she had thought we might start something brand new, a bookshop that had books for children. The beginnings of children's literature. You must look to my stepmother, because the stories and the folk tales and the fairy tales that were being collected were indeed being written down and put into little books for children. And I found that section. I went through those books quite quickly until I could get myself into the ghost stories. It was only the ghost stories that could hold me, because the tension in them felt like the tension in my life. Whereupon I found a separate section in my father's desk called Mary's Works, and found in there the writings of my mother. I read her journal. I read her deepest heart. I read the pain of that father. I read about the time she had to rescue her sister from her marriage because her husband decided he wanted a new one and threatened to put her in asylum. It was much cheaper than divorce. I read about the decision that my own aunt had to make to leave her child behind, because if she took a child, that was illegal to do. I read about how that child died quite quickly because she wasn't cared for. All of this, ghost stories, my mother's writing, fairy tales. Now we went to Newgate Market to get our things and our meat. Newgate, just off the street, with all its dead animals just hanging down in the street, letting their blood pool on the ground. Fanny and I would hold up our skirts and sing to each other, "Do you know the Muffin Man, the Muffin Man, the Muffin Man? Do you know the Muffin Man?" But there was no bell, no syllabub, no muffin. And then we had a visit from Aaron Burr. Oh, you know him. He shot your Hamilton. He was exiled. Where could he go? Our house. And he decided that the child of William Godwin and Mary Wollstonecraft, whether she is a boy or a girl, matters not. He was indeed an equalist. When you learn about his treatment of his own daughter who had died in a ship at sea, and all of that love now poured out on me, and I began to itch. What do you do with a young woman with expectations too large for her to hold? She sheds it. I think you call it eczema now. I was just like a serpent, never ending my skins coming off, leaving trails of snow behind me wherever I went. And my stepmother would have none of it. She said, no, send her to Scotland. Well, we don't have any family in Scotland, so of course my father just knew someone. They'd written letters back and forth, and so he decided to just send me off by letter to the Baxter family. I'll never forget, I was standing there on the Osnaburg to go across the waters alone, and my father was walking there with my stepmother, and she was in some rush to get back, and my father just kind of turned around, and I think for one moment he realized that he was just leaving his daughter on a ship to go to Scotland to someone he didn't know. So he stopped and he said, "Oh, you there?" I looked, there was a woman standing next to me. "I think my father is talking to you." "You there? Mesa?" "Yes, you." "What?" "Will you look after my daughter?" "That I will." She looked after me just long enough to find out where my purse was. So I arrived with nothing, ready to receive my first friend, Isabel Baxter. We were about the same height. We were not unlike each other, though she had black, wild hair, and she made me take my ribbons out of mine and wear it loose, and she made me take my shoes off and walk about on the on the highlands barefoot, even though the rocks would cut my feet. And she said, learn to bear it. Learn to feel that pain right into. You're a wild thing. You're a wild thing, Mary. Not a thing in the city. She taught me how to ride on a horse bareback. And then, one wild night, she had been up all night telling me her deepest secrets. She was, in fact, in love with her sister's husband. Now, don't be shocked. This is not the worst of where it will go in this story. She had been in love with her sister's husband before they were married. And in fact, her sister's husband was in love with her. But, tragedy, she was the second-born daughter. Yeah? Her sister Margaret was born first. And you must, in Catholicism, in that day, who has to be married first? Yes, so it was. So it was that Isabel had to watch her sister marry who she loved, who she knew loved her. Because of the church, it was all rather confusing, don't you think? And Margaret, she was quite sick, and sicker than anyone knew, and she left her body and went on to heaven, which meant that he could go on now and marry, but not the sister of his dead wife. She woke me to tell me all these things, poured out her heart, and she said, come with me. And so she took me on the horse late at night, in the high of the moon, riding, riding, riding. All I could think was, I must remember to write, to write, to write, to write. And we got there to Dundee there. At the end of the street was a hill, a basalt hill. They called the hill the Law. The Law, they called it the Law because it's where law was achieved by burning the witches. 100 witches had been burned on this hill. And they say when the moon is full, if you go and you stand and you climb up that hill, and at the top of the hill, you make a wish, your wish will come true. And I watched Isabel go to the top of that hill and wish to marry the man that she loved. And then it was my turn. And I went up that hill, and I didn't know what to wish. Wish? Ha! I knew itch, not wish. Mother, I'd like to make you proud. I'd like to write something sublime as muffins and syllabub. I would like to love once and truly. And when I got home, I met my second poet. Percy Bysshe Shelley, the greatest poet that ever was. Oh, please do read him. I spent the rest of my life after his death making sure his works were published so that you could read them. Though he was a wild thing, broken from the beginning, still his art. When I got home, there was Percy Bysshe Shelley. He was visiting with my father. It was a rebellious thing. He'd been disowned by his father, but he was getting his money from his grandfather. And my father said to me, you must be nice to Percy Shelley because he's giving me money. And I said, all right then. And so I sat across from dinner and I made sure to smile. Not an easy thing for me. And he asked me questions, and I began to answer his questions. But here's the thing. When I answered his questions, he asked me more. And his questions were designed based on what I was saying, which meant he was listening. And they were designed to draw me out, to improve upon my own thoughts, not his. I had never met a person like this. I loved him then, and I love him still. And all the rest is the stuff of novels. I introduced him to my mother. Here is where my mother lay, here is a stone. And Percy immediately put his hands upon that stone, as if he could somehow then know my mother. I said, do you feel her presence here? He said, yes, yes, of course I feel her presence here, Mary. You do, I do. Do you believe in life after death? I don't know what I believe fully, but I sense something. Does God win, Percy? Does God win? I don't know, Mary. Let's find out. That's when he told me he had a wife. It was an arranged marriage. The rich are not happy in their marriages. This good money was marry this good money, and you must be the bearer of it by the fault of your birth. And I'd read all my mother's writings on the state of marriage. Yes, you can see how independent my thinking was. And he said he had not lain with her and did not dare to lay with her again, and he wanted out of it, and I was his true love. And we told my father, and he was absolutely against it. And Percy reminded him of his own writings, and my father threw him out of the house. And then he blamed me for it. And then Percy came, oh, this is where my story moves from Cinderella to Romeo and Juliet. He came in with a pistol and some laudanum, all the way up the stairs, where I was at the top in my balcony, bemoaning, this is my love, my only love, knowing that I had wished for him on that basalt hill. So it's no surprise that we eloped together. Is it? And it is no surprise that I took my half-sister, not my half-sister, I took my stepsister with me. I wanted to take my half-sister, but Fanny wouldn't go. I wasn't going to leave her behind. Was it an elopement or an escape, a rescue? It's all written. I wrote everything down. The trip in a wild barge across the waters, across the channel, there in the hotel with stepmother bursting through the door to try to convince Mary Jane to come home, and Mary Jane demanding her independence and refusing to go, and then Percy getting the idea that we should walk across France to Switzerland, where the people are beautiful and neutral, and there we were going to walk across France. And he thought perhaps we should have a mule or a donkey or something to carry our belongings. What did he know about it? So they went out and they got something, and so we had our belongings there on the donkey, and we went along for a little while, and the donkey stepped in a pit and went lame. So we had to exchange the donkey for a mule, which was better. It was better. But then as we were going along, Percy tripped in a hole. So now Percy was on the mule, and we were the donkeys carrying the belongings. What a funny set we were. It was the only thing funny about it, because the countryside was not the pastoral countryside of the books and paintings we had seen. This was just after the French Revolution. Do you remember that the French Revolution was followed by winter? Do you remember that all the bodies could not be brought up before the snow and the cold came and were their first grave, their first death blanket lying over them? And so as we walked, all around us were these rotting corpses of soldiers who had bled their life out for their country. For why? Quite quickly I was filled with child. I was writing everything furious, and all I wanted to do was go home. And so we ended up now on a barge, and we were coming around to make our way around by the Guernsey to take our way up across the English channel there. And I looked up, and right on the hillside, there was this most wonderful, picturesque castle. And I turned to the bargeman and I said, "Well, what is that?" He said, "You don't know about that?" I said, "No, I don't know about that. Could you tell me?" "I'm a bit dry, you know." Percy, can I have a coin? Will this wet your whistle? It'll do. Well, up there, that's a castle Frankenstein. Well, you see, it's all adding up, isn't it? That's a castle Frankenstein there. Conrad Dippel, he was quite obsessed with bringing the bodies back from the grave, you know. He would grind their bones and he would fill it with his own blood in a little mixture, and then he would try to put that in the mouth of the dead bodies so he could bring them back to life. Did it work? No. You could bring it back to life. What would it be like if you can bring your loved ones back to life? Huh. Well, that would mean we win, not God, wouldn't it? Because then I wouldn't have killed my mother. I could bring my mother back, and then I could have a real mother rather than a portrait of a mother. And then I birthed my own child. You see, we were living in poverty because my father disowned us. And Percy was out trying to, you know, avoid the debt collectors and trying to convince his grandfather to help him out. And my sister, half-sister, was always with him because she was a much more cheerful companion than I was. And so my child was born alone in that little garret and lived. For 10 days. Oh dear, memories bring mood that make merry maudlin. I shall never forget holding her. I'd just woken up from a dream, and she was so still beside me. And I just picked her up and I brought her over to the fireplace. I began to rub her. You know how you do with the puppies when they're born like that. You can get life back in them. And all I wanted was Conrad Dippel. I wanted to be up in that castle Frankenstein. I wanted bones in my own blood. To bring me back my baby alive. Oh, Maestro, I've gotten into one of my moods again. You'll have to play. Do play for us, please. I'm a writer. My baby died. And I became a writer. Art lives on. I can write to my mother. I can write for my mother. I can write to my child. I can write for my child. They all come through my pen to the paper and live on. What is immortality? Maybe it's art. Percy's divorce was finalized, and his wife, Harriet, went on to a new love, which went badly. She threw herself into the river. And my half-sister, Fanny, who never had the courage to leave, but couldn't tolerate being there with my father and my stepmother, took some laudanum and left us. Everyone all around us, taking their own lives, or dying natural deaths. Death was everywhere. But this, art, music, painting, stories. I conceived 4 children. Only one lived on. And that all came from my pain to my pen, to my paper, so that I might live on. And then suddenly, it was 1916, and a volcano erupted in Indonesia. They call it the year without a summer. And when that volcano erupted, well, we were all just quickened by it. Just absolutely quickened. You don't know what life is worth until death is breathing its hot breath on you. And we started to write. Percy and I, we just started to write madly and wildly. I was downstairs writing, he was upstairs, one floor above me, both of us madly writing. It was the best of our love then, when we were writing together, but very alone, with our pens and our pain and our paper. And my half-sister decided that she would find a poet of her own. And so she went out to the theatre because she had heard this wonderful poet, the most famous poet of our day, Lord Byron, was going to be at the theatre. When I say Lord Byron, is there some recognition in your eyes? Oh, yes, Lord Byron. He was a wild, large thing, yes? You can feel him right now as I say his name, sweeping into the room. Everyone adored Lord Byron. His poetry, I don't think, was quite as good as my husband's. It didn't matter. Everyone adored him. He would write something. By the next day, all the copies were out, and by the next morning, they were all sold. They couldn't wait. Every poem that dropped from his mouth was like jewels to the publishers. He was mad wild. He had a carriage made a copy of Napoleon's. Can you imagine? It was military blue with gold lanterns all around. And everywhere he went with his entourage. His entourage was this: 8 dogs, 5 cats, 3 monkeys, 2 pheasants, a wounded eagle with a bad feather who could never fly again, and, oh, stuff it in, a tame bear. He would open up his carriage, his whole menagerie would lead the way, and then Lord Byron would come out thinking about his poetry, and everyone who was near would simply swoon. Following out behind him was his friend, Dr. John Polidori. But was he really a friend? I'm not sure, because he was actually hired by the newspapers to follow around after him, to write. He was the very first paparazzi, I think. Well, it was that my sister-in-law, Jane, decided she took a new name, Claire Claremont, and she went to the theatre and she sent a note up to Lord Byron's box saying that she was the stepsister to William Godwin and Mary Wollstonecraft's daughter, Mary Shelley. You may have heard of her. And Mary Shelley is married to Percy Bysshe Shelley, certainly the best romantic poet that has ever been. Ho! Lord Byron agreed to meet her. They had a wonderful night. She got a child, but not him. Oh, fates. That is a whole nother story, and we don't have time. But let us just say our whole lives then, in between writing, was trying to get Lord Byron to fall in love with my sister-in-law, Claire. And so he decided to go to Geneva that year without a summer, and here we are coming to the story that you know. We went to Geneva because Lord Byron was going to Geneva, and he rented Via Diodati there at the top of the hill, right by the beautiful lake, with his menagerie with him. 8 dogs and 5 cats and 3 monkeys, you know, the whole menagerie. They were all pacing outside on the porch and all around the rounds, while he was inside pacing back and forth, and Claire was just following him around. Are you having another poem? I'll write it down for you. Horrible. Percy and I wouldn't live anywhere near it. Well, we lived close to it, but we weren't going to live in it. So we rented ourselves our own little villa just on the bottom of the hill there, and we would all meet up because there was nothing else to do because of the volcano. It was snowing, red snow in Italy. The cloud cover from that volcano was so great, you had drought all the way in New York State. You couldn't sail on that lake. The winds were wild, and the storms wouldn't stop. So what could we do but sit around? We'd go in and we'd sit around at Via Diodati. I remember one day I was heading up for our sit-around. I just wanted to stay back and write, but up I went, and Dr. John Polidori, Lord Byron's supposed best friend, was standing on the railing of the porch railing, you know, standing on, and then he saw me, and he jumped off the porch railing to land on his knee to say, "I love you." Because he had told Lord Byron that he had loved me, and Lord Byron said, "You must do some great romantic dexter, you know, like jump off the porch." He got out, "I love you," and then he said, "Ah!" because he had twisted his ankle. Now, he is the mule, and I'm the donkey, because I have to lift him and carry him all the way back inside. And I settled him on the settee there. "You great fool, what were you doing?" He said, I love you so much. There's never been anyone that I've loved as much as you. You are everything to me." And he doesn't even look at you properly. "I will never, ever love anyone else but Percy Bysshe Shelley, and you shall never speak to me in this way ever again." I was in a mood. Lord Byron was in a mood. It spoiled the whole household. It was such a storm. What could we do? We'd been reading ghost stories the whole week. And finally, I remember Lord Byron was reading out. We'd take turns reading out loud. He was reading something aloud. He was a wonderful out loud reader. And he took it, and all of a sudden, he just threw it into the fireplace. He said, "Horrible!" And we all watched it burn. He said, anyone could write something better than all this drivel. I'm so bored of drivel. I need good words, true words. Percy, Let's have a contest. Let's write something better. Let us write something better to entertain our... You see it there, don't you? If I have laid my dominoes properly, you see it there, right there, right? You have heard that the contest was for everyone in the room. Let's have a contest. Of course it wasn't. Because I was what? I was the 19-year-old girl. But you know Percy. I've already introduced you to Percy. So wasn't it Percy who said, Mary's the best writer of the whole lot? Oh, that's true. Mary can write. I don't know what the point would be, but... Mary, you game? Yes. Ankle swollen, Dr. John Polidori said, I'll write something too. Claire said, I'm not going to write. I'm just going to copy it all down for you. Dr. John Polidori. That whole night he talked about everything he was learning in folklore, about death and afterlife. It was one of our most interesting subjects. And he had just been to the theater, and at the theater was a traveling man of science. And he had on a table, the table at an angle for good theatrical lighting. And on that table was a battery for producing electricity, and an arrangement of frogs' legs, all dead frogs' legs, yes? Do you see any of this in the theater these days? So he would take the electricity and he'd apply it to the dead frogs' legs, and the dead frogs' legs would what? They would just go like this, yes, you know. But here's the thing. Here was what had the whole place riveted, and they were filling the seats because after the electricity was off, the frog legs still danced. The lightning flashed. We all wondered, is life electrical? What does that mean about God, then? I don't. Well, he came in the very next day with his story. He called it The Vampire, about a creature that had immortality by drinking the blood from other living people. That story did go out, and there was a gentleman who found it, a certain Bram Stoker. He wrote a very famous novel of Dracula. From that night, many monsters were born. Lord Byron's story, you will not be shocked. Lord Byron's tale, and he moved across the room as he told it, using the lightning in the window to his best advantage. His tale was about a beautiful, seductive woman who was leading a man deep into the forest until she had him in his clutches and turned into a monster. At which point, Percy fainted. And I ran to him. He was delicate, very delicate, always very delicate. And for a moment there, in the flashing lightning coming through the green tinted windows, I wondered if I lost him. I just pulled him up to me. All the troubles were over, all the troubles behind me. And the words that I had said to Dr. John Polidori rang truer than it ever. No matter what happens, no matter what he does or who he is, this wild child man, do not die. For I will go to the ends of the earth to bring you back if you do. I had, with all its flaws, within me, a sublime love. Yes, Maestro, a music for love.
Sublime. Thank you. I hope you all have tasted it at times in your life. Syllabub, muffins, Percy. It comes and goes. It's fleeting. It isn't always there. Art wakes it. That night, I brought him carefully into bed. I laid him down next to me. So close, so close. I couldn't sleep. I just watched his face. Such an angel when he slept. And then I slept finally at last. I dreamed it. He was born in me. I saw in my dream. I saw that creature laying there like a whole thing, not like the Hollywood movies have made it. A whole thing, but its organs replaced with organs alive, and by some machination of electricity, you hear it all coming together, it's all added up. By some electrical force. But that thing laying there is not alone. What is there with him? A man named Frankenstein. Which is the monster? The man, or the man made? I saw the electricity enter into him, and I saw him quicken, and I saw him open his eyes, and his eyes were yellow from death. But Frankenstein, the monster, Dr. Frankenstein, betrayed him in that first waking moment. And that was that. I had everything I needed. The rest just poured out. I could hardly keep pace with it. It all just poured out. I just poured out everything. All the dead bodies and corpses of the French Revolution, and my half-sister floating in the River Derwent, and my mother's portrait always watching over me with her perfect eyes, and disowned from my father's, and all my dead babies. All of it is there. I was 19 years old when I wrote it. You wonder how it is that a 19-year-old girl could write such a thing. But now you know my story. I shall say this only to end. How the devil could I have written anything other than that? Thank you.